On January 8, 2026, French President Emmanuel Macron delivered a speech that sent shockwaves through global capitals. The world watched as Macron, standing at the heart of French power, addressed not only his nation, but the entire international community. His words were measured, yet carried a sense of urgency that was impossible to ignore. In a direct and unprecedented move, he accused the United States, under President Trump, of abandoning its closest allies and undermining the very foundations of international law. Macron's criticism was pointed, highlighting a growing rift between Washington and its traditional partners. Macron warned that the world is teetering on the edge, with the law of the strongest threatening to replace diplomacy and mutual respect. He painted a picture of a world order in flux, where old alliances are being tested and the rules that have governed peace for decades are now at risk of unraveling. He condemned a return to new colonialism and imperialism, signaling a pivotal moment in transatlantic relations. Macron's words echoed through the halls of power, reminding leaders of the dangers of repeating the mistakes of the past and the importance of learning from history. Macron's message was clear. Europe can no longer accept a world order dictated by unilateral American actions. He called on European nations to stand together, to defend their values and interests, and to chart a more independent course in global affairs. His speech was a somber diagnosis of a relationship in crisis, a plea for course correction before the damage becomes irreparable. Macron urged leaders to reflect on the consequences of division and to seek renewed cooperation before it is too late. The world now watches to see how Washington and Europe will respond to this challenge. The uncertainty in the air is palpable, as citizens and leaders alike await the next move in this high-stakes diplomatic standoff. The stability of the international system may hang in the balance, as the choices made in the coming weeks could shape the future of global relations for years to come. Macron's criticisms were triggered by a series of bold American moves that left allies feeling sidelined. The US-led capture of Venezuelan President Maduro, executed without consulting allies, shocked the international community. Renewed US interest in acquiring Greenland, with aggressive rhetoric, alarmed European capitals and challenged Danish sovereignty. President Trump's inflammatory threats to annex Canada further eroded trust among America's closest partners. These actions form a pattern. An unpredictable America, willing to act alone and dismissive of the principles that once bound the alliance. For Europe, this marks a fundamental shift. No longer isolated incidents, but a deliberate turn away from collaboration. Macron's warnings found strong echoes across Europe. German President Steinmeier and Chancellor Merz called for a unified European response, signaling the end of reliance on American benevolence. The EU's foreign policy chief, Kaja Kallas, condemned US pressure on Greenland and stressed the need to uphold international law. The EU positioned itself as a defender of the rules-based order, moving the dispute beyond just US-Denmark relations. UK and Canadian leaders reaffirmed support for Greenland's sovereignty, showing solidarity with Denmark. This broad front of condemnation, from Berlin to London, illustrates how isolated the US has become. America's recent actions have deeply damaged the Western alliance. European public trust in the US has collapsed. A January 2026 poll showed 76% of Germans no longer see the US as a reliable partner. Only 15% still trust America. In contrast, most Germans trust France and Britain, signaling a realignment of confidence within Europe. Nearly 70% of Germans now doubt NATO's security guarantees, calling the alliance's credibility into question. This skepticism pressures European governments to seek alternatives and reduce dependence on the US. Macron's critique reflects this public mood. The US is seen as unpredictable and self-interested. European leaders now have a mandate to pursue strategic autonomy. Rebuilding trust will be a monumental task for any US administration. Macron champions strategic autonomy, empowering Europe to defend its interests independently. This isn't about severing ties with the US, but about Europe investing in its own defense and security. Strategic autonomy means Europe can act in crises without waiting for Washington's approval. Macron insists this strengthens, not weakens, NATO by making Europe a more capable partner. Economically, it's about protecting European industries and securing critical supply chains. The goal? A comprehensive European power, integrating economic, diplomatic, and military tools. It's ambitious, but Macron and others see it as essential for Europe's survival in a turbulent world. Macron's speech wasn't just about the US. He broadened his critique to include China and Russia, signaling a shift in Europe's global outlook. By addressing these major powers, Macron made it clear that Europe's challenges are not limited to its relationship with Washington, but extend across the globe. He condemned China's aggressive trade practices, highlighting how Beijing's economic strategies have put European industries at risk. Macron warned that Europe's economic vulnerabilities are growing, especially as China expands its influence in critical sectors like technology and manufacturing. He urged European leaders to recognize the long-term risks of overdependence on Chinese imports and investments. The call for autonomy is also about reducing dependence on China and protecting European industries from unfair competition. Macron emphasized the need for Europe to invest in its own capabilities, strengthen its supply chains, and support innovation to remain competitive on the world stage. On Russia, Macron labeled it a destabilizing power, citing the ongoing war in Ukraine as proof of Moscow's threat to European security. He argued that Russia's actions have upended the continent's sense of stability and forced Europe to rethink its approach to defense and diplomacy. The conflict has shattered hopes for partnership with Russia and made European defense more urgent than ever. Macron called for greater unity among European nations, stressing that collective security is now a top priority in the face of new and evolving threats. Macron's address was a comprehensive threat assessment. He argued that the old rules of international relations are being challenged by multiple powers at once. Europe, he said, must adapt quickly to this new reality, where alliances are shifting and global competition is intensifying. Europe must now navigate a world where it can't rely solely on Washington for support or security. The continent faces a future where self-reliance and strategic independence are more important than ever before. The continent faces a strategic triangle, balancing an unpredictable ally in the US and aggressive rivals in China and Russia. Macron's message was clear: Europe must chart its own course in a rapidly changing world. The war in Ukraine remains the ultimate test of Western unity. Despite tensions, the US and Europe continue to cooperate on Ukraine out of necessity. Recent Paris summits included US envoys discussing security guarantees for Ukraine, showing that critical collaboration persists. Ukrainian President Zelensky announced near finalization of bilateral security guarantees with the US. German Chancellor Merz urges allies to raise the cost for Russia, aligning with US strategy. The war pulls allies together, even as political disagreements threaten to push them apart. Common threats still demand joint action. Macron's critique stopped short of calling for a break with Washington. He recognizes that, despite Europe's push for autonomy, the US remains indispensable on global challenges. His goal? Jolt America into recognizing the damage done, not to end the alliance. Macron's message is a call for the US to return to multilateralism and mutual respect. Ongoing cooperation on Ukraine proves that partnership is still possible. Macron wants a more balanced relationship, Europe as an equal, not a dependent. He challenges the US to see a stronger Europe as a better ally, not a rival. Macron concluded his address with a passionate plea for renewed international cooperation and a return to a rules-based global order. He emphasized that the world is facing unprecedented challenges: climate change, security threats, and economic instability that no nation can solve alone. Macron called on leaders to set aside narrow interests and work together for the greater good, warning that isolationism and division would only deepen global crises. He envisions a future where nations, despite their differences, unite to tackle urgent global issues. Macron sees the United States as a vital partner in this effort. If it recommits to the shared values of democracy, human rights, and multilateralism that have long underpinned the transatlantic alliance. Macron's hope is for a revitalized transatlantic partnership, one that is grounded in democracy, the rule of law, and mutual respect. He believes that only by working together can Europe and America shape a more stable and just world. But for multilateralism to truly succeed, Macron insists that Europe must become stronger, more united, and more independent in its decision-making. A confident Europe, he argues, can be a pillar of stability and a force for peace. A robust and self-assured Europe would help balance global power, defend diplomacy, and uphold international law, ensuring that no single nation dominates the world stage. Macron's speech was more than a call to action. It was a manifesto for a new future, one where Europe takes responsibility for its destiny, and America remembers the value of its oldest friends and allies. The choice, Macron argued, is stark. Either the world succumbs to fracture and chaos, or it embraces renewed cooperation and shared purpose to address the challenges ahead. Despite deep pessimism and uncertainty, Macron offered a vision of hope, a world where alliances are rebuilt on respect, solidarity, and the pursuit of the common good for all.